The very first time Karen saw Max, our golden retriever, she didn't smile, wave, or ask if she could pet him. She narrowed her eyes, crossed her arms like a traffic barrier, and said, "That dog better not step on my grass." We had moved into the neighborhood just a week earlier, excited to settle into a peaceful community where our 7-year-old daughter Lily could finally begin healing from the trauma of the past year. And Max, her emotional support dog, was a big part of that recovery. We'd adopted him after months of therapy, hoping his calm presence would help her anxiety and panic attacks, and he did more in 2 weeks than all the medication combined. Max wasn't just a pet, he was part of our family. And when we signed the papers to buy our house in Oak Creek Hills, we never imagined that a dog would ignite a war between us and the HOA president from hell. Karen lived 3 houses down, in a pristine 2-story home with perfectly squared hedges, 3 security cameras on her front porch, and a yard sign that read, "Rules are respect." Everyone in the neighborhood seemed to walk on eggshells around her, avoiding eye contact, trimming their bushes to exact lengths, and never leaving garbage cans out more than a few minutes past pickup. We didn't know any of this until our very first walk around the block with Max, when Karen appeared out of nowhere like a prairie dog emerging from a hole and barked, "Is that dog registered with the HOA?" I politely said we'd just moved in and were still going through all the paperwork, but she didn't seem interested in explanations. She snapped a picture of Max on her phone and said, "HOA policy limits dogs to 25 pounds. That one looks way over." Then she turned and walked off without another word. I didn't think much of it, figured she was just being nosy. But the next day, we received a violation notice taped to our front door. It accused us of harboring a non-compliant dog, walking him off-leash even though he was on one, and failing to submit a pet registration form within the allowed grace period. Attached was a $75 fine and a stern reminder that repeat violations could result in legal action. My wife was furious, especially since we had already emailed the HOA office with Max's paperwork, including his emotional support certification and vaccination records. No one from the HOA had replied. We figured it was a mistake and left a voicemail on the office line. Then, 3 days later, another letter came, this time with a fine of $150, stating that a neighbor had reported aggressive behavior from Max, including growling at a child and chasing a cat. That was an outright lie. Max barely barked, never growled, and was more likely to lick a burglar than attack one. We had security footage showing every walk we'd taken, every moment in the front yard, and none of it matched the complaint. That's when we realized something wasn't just off-fit, was targeted. Karen had made us her latest project, and Max was the excuse. It turned out she had personally written many of the HOA's obscure pet rules, including one that required approval for any dog over 30 pounds and another that banned dog toys in front yards. We started hearing stories from neighbors. One woman said Karen fined her for leaving a bowl of water outside for her dog. Another said Karen had reported her for using a retractable leash. Slowly the picture formed. Wasn't just a stickler. For rules, she was a tyrant who enforced imaginary ones and ruled the neighborhood like a dictator. We started documenting everything. Every letter, every conversation, every walk with Max. I set up an extra security camera facing the sidewalk. My wife, determined not to be bullied, contacted a lawyer, who confirmed that most of the fines were unenforceable without a hearing. But Karen didn't stop. When we didn't pay the fines immediately, she sent another letter claiming we were now in violation of the delinquent account clause and threatened to place a lien on our property if we didn't comply. My daughter started asking why people were staring at us during walks, why one of her school friends wasn't allowed to come over anymore. One morning, she found a handwritten note slipped into our mailbox that said, "Your dog is dangerous. Kids live here." That was when I knew this had gone too far. I confronted Karen in person. She stood on her porch with her arms crossed and said, "If you don't like the rules, maybe this isn't the neighborhood for you." I told her Max was a registered support animal, that we had followed every real rule, and that this was harassment. She smiled and said, "Then sue me." It wasn't a threat, it was a dare. That night, we called an emergency meeting with a few other families we had gotten to know. To our surprise, everyone had a Karen story. One man said he was fined for putting up Christmas lights before December 1st. Another said Karen had called animal control on his 12-year-old lab because it had limped too aggressively. Everyone had paid their fines, kept their heads down, and hoped she'd move on. But this time, it felt different. Maybe it was because we weren't backing down. Maybe it was because Max, with his warm eyes and gentle nature, had become a symbol of something bigger, the idea that kindness didn't have to be quiet, that sometimes standing up meant speaking out. Whatever the reason, something started to shift. We drafted a formal petition to challenge Karen's authority on certain enforcement issues. We started a neighborhood email chain where people could share violations and compare them. And while we didn't say it out loud, it felt like we were preparing for something bigger. We didn't know what Karen would do next, but we knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. Karen didn't waste any time retaliating after word spread that we were organizing against her. And what followed felt like psychological warfare disguised as neighborhood policy. Within days of starting our petition, 3 new violation notices were delivered to our mailbox in bold red ink, citing everything from excessive grass growth to unapproved mailbox decor, which apparently referred to the small silver bone-shaped name tag we had attached to the post that said Max. It wasn't even visible from the street, but somehow Karen had noticed it. Probably on one of her routine surveillance walks, yes. Actual walks where she strolled past homes with a clipboard and phone in hand, snapping pictures and scribbling notes like a code enforcement officer on a warpath. It didn't stop with us. One by one, our neighbors who had dared to speak with us also received violations. Marcia, the kind woman across the street who had signed our petition, was slapped with a $100 fine for hosting a non-permitted group gathering because she had held a Sunday brunch with 3 of her friends on her back patio. James, elderly veteran 2 doors down, got hit with a notice about his flag height being above ordinance. Even though his flag had flown at the same spot for 20 years, Karen was lashing out, marking every potential threat, and reminding everyone that the HOA board was still hers. But there was one major problem with her plan. She wasn't following the actual HOA bylaws. People were finally noticing. My wife, who had a background in administrative law, started combing through the HOA handbook. What she found was astonishing. Karen had created unofficial amendments, some printed on separate paper and stuffed into resident packets without a vote, and was using them to fine people. Several of the policies she referenced in her violation letters didn't even exist in the original governing documents. Worse, most of the violations she was enforcing hadn't gone through the proper review process required by HOA law in our state. It was a goldmine of procedural abuse, and we started compiling all of it. Our attorney friend advised us to stay patient, build a file, and keep engaging with neighbors to rally support for an emergency board meeting. Meanwhile, Max became something of a neighborhood icon. Kids waved to him as we walked. A few families began bringing their dogs out again, no longer hiding them behind fences or walking them only at night. The more Karen cracked down, the more obvious it became that she was misusing her power. But then, just as things seemed to be turning our way, something happened that pushed everything into chaos. One quiet Thursday morning, just as I was leaving for work, I found a note stuffed inside our screen door. Unlike the other typed or stamped HOA letters, this one was handwritten in large, angry block letters. "Move or your dog won't make IT to Christmas." My heart dropped. I stood there, frozen, reading the words over and over while Max sat by the door, tail wagging, completely unaware of the threat hanging over his head. I called the police immediately, filed a formal report, and handed over the note along with recent footage from our cameras. Unfortunately, the cameras didn't catch the moment it was delivered. It had been slipped in between our motion sensor intervals, but the officer didn't seem surprised. "This isn't the first time I've heard about drama with your HOA," he said, carefully bagging the note as evidence. "You might want to think about installing better lighting and keeping that dog inside at night." We were terrified. Max started sleeping in our bedroom. Lily, already sensitive and anxious, began having nightmares again. The whole reason we got Max was to help her heal, and now he had become the reason she was scared. I knew deep down who was behind the note. I couldn't prove it, but every gut instinct screamed Karen's name. Whether she wrote it herself or encouraged someone else to do it, I didn't know, but her fingerprints were all over the intimidation. I made copies of the letter and handed them out at our next neighborhood meeting, which we now held weekly, rotating homes in secret so Karen wouldn't target any one place too often. The note was the final straw for many. More people came forward. One woman admitted Karen had once called CPS on her for child neglect after her son played in the sprinklers shirtless. The case was dropped instantly, but the fear lingered. Another man said his tires were slashed weeks after refusing to repaint his garage door. We were uncovering a pattern, not just rule enforcement, but fear, retaliation, and psychological intimidation. With enough signatures finally collected, we sent the formal notice for a community vote to remove Karen from her position. Required a full member vote, public notice posted 72 hours in advance, and a quorum of over 50% participation. Karen, of course, tried to block it. She declared the vote illegitimate and sent out a mass email warning of a coordinated attack by rule breakers and pet agitators, which only made her look more paranoid. She tried to cancel the reservation for the community center, where we planned to hold the vote, but we got around it by hosting it at the local library's community room. That night, nearly 70 residents showed up, more than any HOA event in the past 5 years. My wife and I presented our case calmly, with evidence, violation comparisons, and documentation showing Karen's manipulation of HOA policies. Other residents stood up, one after another, recounting their own stories, their fears, the fines, the lies. Karen sat in the back row, arms crossed, silent but fuming. When the vote was called, we handed out slips, counted them in front of everyone, and announced the result. 58 in favor of removal, 9 against, and 3 abstaining. Karen had officially been removed from her position. People applauded, some even cried, and for a brief moment, it felt like the nightmare was over. But what none of us expected was that losing her title would only unchain Karen from the few rules she was still following. Because what she did next wasn't about HOA power, it was personal, vengeful, and shockingly unhinged. We thought we had won. We thought Max was safe. The firestorm Karen unleashed after losing control made everything that came before look like child's play. And the way it all unraveled would expose a truth so disturbing that even those who had once defended her couldn't look the other way. Karen disappeared for 2 days after the vote that removed her from power, which in hindsight should have been our first warning. No angry emails, no violation letters, not even her usual surveillance walks with that ever-present clipboard, just silence. It was eerie how quickly the street felt different without her presence, as if someone had lifted a heavy blanket from the whole neighborhood. For a brief moment, there was peace. Kids played on their front lawns. Neighbors chatted without, glancing over their shoulders, and Max finally enjoyed a walk around the block without someone scowling or scribbling notes. My wife and I began to believe the worst was behind us. But that illusion shattered on the third night, just after midnight. When we were jolted awake by the sound of loud banging and screaming outside our house, I ran to the window and saw flashing lights, not from a police car, but from the red and blue floodlights mounted to the top of what looked like a private security truck. 2 uniformed men were standing on our lawn, yelling for us to come outside immediately, while another paced near the driveway with a dog crate. My heart slammed in my chest as Max barked behind me, already tense from the commotion. I threw on a shirt and stepped out the front door with my phone in hand, already dialing 911, demanding to know who they were and what they were doing. One of the men barked back that they were with Community Compliance Services, an organization I'd never heard of, and that they were here to collect an unauthorized and dangerous animal per the direction of the Homeowners Compliance Review Board. My wife appeared behind me, yelling that Max was an emotional support dog, registered and protected by law, and we demanded they leave immediately. It was all bluff and intimidation, but the uniforms, the truck, and their aggressive tone made it feel real. As I continued to film them and announce that police were on the way, the men finally backed off, muttering that this wasn't over, and that someone would be held accountable. They drove off into the night, and the moment I stepped back inside, I knew exactly who was behind it. No one else could have orchestrated such a bizarre theatrical stunt except Karen. By morning, our footage had gone viral in the neighborhood Facebook group, which we had once hesitated to join out. Of fear, but now used as a shield. People were furious. Even those who hadn't supported our petition before were now outraged. Someone pointed out that Community Compliance Services wasn't even a licensed agency. It was just a fake company registered under a generic LLC the month before. Likely created by Karen or someone working with her. The police confirmed, the same when they followed up later that day. They advised us to file for a restraining order if she showed up again. But the detective who spoke with us warned, if she's this obsessed, she might escalate in ways you don't expect. That evening, I checked our mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph taken from behind a tree, showing my daughter Lily walking Max home from school. On the back was a handwritten message, "Still think your mud is safe?" My hands trembled as I read it. This was no longer just HOA harassment. It was stalking. We contacted the police again, gave them the photo, and immediately installed extra security around our home. I alerted the school, changed our routines, and started picking Lily up myself. My wife, normally composed, broke down for the first time since this all began. But if that was Karen's goal, she underestimated just how far we were willing to go to protect our family. The next day, I called a meeting, not a quiet gathering like before, but a full-blown town hall. With the help of several neighbors, we rented the local firehouse community room and invited not just HOA members, but the local press. We printed out every violation notice, every fabricated rule, the surveillance screenshots, and now the criminal level, harassment. And we presented it all. The most damning piece, however, came from an unlikely Eli Sharon, the former HOA secretary who had quit months earlier but had kept quiet until now. She stood up at the meeting, hands shaking, and admitted that Karen had coerced her into signing off on forged documents, hidden financial reports, and personal reimbursements for things like private printing, fake lawn inspections, and even gift cards for neighborhood outreach that were never distributed. "She scared me into silence," Sharon said. "But I can't let this continue. She's out of control." That confession opened the floodgates. One by one, more neighbors stood and shared stories. A woman said her dog was poisoned 2 years earlier, but she never proved it. A man revealed he'd been secretly recording Karen for months and played a voice memo where she bragged about getting rid of that therapy dog and how she knew how to make people leave without ever lifting a finger. The room was stunned. The police were already investigating, but now the HOA board had evidence to file formal charges of fraud, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds. Karen hadn't shown up to the meeting, but we found out later she had been parked down the street watching from her car. The next morning she vanished. Her car was gone. Her blinds were shut. No one saw her for a week. But while we finally had some breathing room, the damage she left behind remained. Lily was scared to sleep alone. Max barked at the slightest creak of the fence. And even though we felt vindicated, the tension didn't fully release, because we knew someone like Karen doesn't just disappear, she lurks, plans, waits. Sure enough, on the 8th day after the town hall, a certified letter arrived from Karen's lawyer. It was a formal cease and desist, accusing us of public defamation, targeted harassment, and civil conspiracy, demanding we retract all public statements and pay damages. It was laughable on the surface, but the message was clear. She still wanted control, and she still believed she could silence us with fear. We handed the letter to our attorney, who wasn't surprised at all. "She's stalling, trying to intimidate you into backing off before criminal charges catch up to her, but that was never going to happen." We were done being quiet. We were done being afraid. And with everything we'd collected, we were about to push things to the next level, court. Because what Karen didn't realize is that once she brought fear into our home, once she made it personal and threatened our child, she crossed a line that we would never let her step back from. And what came next would be public, permanent, and would ensure she never held power again. Not in this neighborhood, not in any other. The story wasn't over. The real reckoning was only just beginning. We filed a civil suit against Karen 3 weeks after receiving the bogus CSA Ciendesis letter from her lawyer. And though our attorney warned us it could take months to move through the courts, the act of formally taking legal action felt like reclaiming a small part of our peace. The suit was for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress, supported by a mountain of evidence that had grown fatter with every letter, every video clip, every police report, and every whispered confession from neighbors too scared to speak out before. Karen, despite her disappearance from neighborhood life, wasn't entirely invisible. We knew from the HOA's internal mailing records that she still lived at the same address and had been observed, sneaking out early mornings in a hooded jacket, driving with her car lights off until she hit the main road. She wasn't gone, just hiding. But hiding didn't mean surrender, because right as we began the civil process, another series of events proved she was still pulling strings in ways we hadn't even imagined. It started when Max's pet license renewal with the city was mysteriously denied. The letter said there was an open behavioral violation under review, referencing a claim that our dog had bitten someone. We were stunned. Max had never bitten anyone in his life. When we called Animal Services, they told us the report had been submitted anonymously, complete with a photo of a golden retriever that vaguely resembled Max and a written description, alleging the dog had charged a pedestrian and caused a laceration. We demanded the full report and submitted footage and GPS logs from our security system and Max's smart collar, which proved beyond doubt that he hadn't left our property at the time of the alleged incident. The city apologized and the file was dropped. But now it was clear Karen wasn't acting alone. Someone was feeding her systems, helping her submit fake complaints, maybe even filing them on her behalf to keep her hands clean. It was the realization that pushed us to dig deeper, and when we did, we found something darker hiding in plain sight. Our neighbor across the street, Brian, had always been quiet, kept to himself, waved but never lingered to chat. But when I caught him photographing Max through our fence one afternoon, something clicked. I confronted him politely, asked if he needed something, looked startled and muttered something about just admiring the dog. But later that evening, I noticed his car parked near Karen's house, even though he had no reason to be there. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for us to start watching. Within a week, another neighbor with a porch camera caught Brian delivering what looked like printed letters to 3 mailboxes around the block. When we reviewed the footage, we realized they were Karen's old-style HOA violation notices, same fake bylaws. We approached one of the recipients, a widow named Martha, who hadn't been involved in any of the prior drama, was trembling when she handed over the letter, which accused her of failure to clean mildew from eaves and demanded $80 in cash. That's when it hit. Oscarin had turned her harassment into a side operation. A shadow HOA scheme targeting the vulnerable or uninvolved, still pretending to wield power even after being removed. She was using Brian, and possibly others too, push her false authority under the radar. We immediately informed our attorney and contacted the HOA's new interim board president, a kind and pragmatic man named Leo who had once been fined for painting his garage door beige instead of white. He was horrified by the revelation and called an emergency public meeting to warn the neighborhood. At the meeting, we presented evidence, shared the footage of Brian, and explained the pattern. Leo made a formal announcement disavowing all unapproved notices, emphasizing that Karen no longer had any authority and that the real HOA board would be investigating fraudulent activity going forward. But Karen still hadn't faced the full consequences. Our lawyer, now armed with even more documentation, filed an emergency motion to accelerate the court proceedings, citing harassment and community-level fraud. A court date was set within the month. As that day approached, we received one final scare. It was late one Friday night when our backyard motion sensor tripped. I opened the app connected to our camera feed and watched in real time as a hooded figure entered through the side gate and locked. We later realized and crept toward the doghouse we'd built for Max. He hadn't used it much since the incident. With the poisoned meat months before, but we still kept it there for shade. The figure knelt down, pulled something from their bag, and began stuffing it into the doghouse. I yelled and turned on every outdoor light, which sent the person scrambling. Max barked furiously as I ran outside with my phone recording. Duh. Intruder had already slipped out the gate, but not before leaving behind what they were trying to place inside. A sealed Ziploc bag full of raw hamburgers stuffed with blue pelts rat poison again. My stomach dropped. I handed the evidence over to police, who confirmed it matched the earlier poisoning case. This time, they had enough to act. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's front porch showed the intruder's face as they escaped clear enough for facial recognition. The ID came back. Brian. He was arrested 2 days later and charged with animal cruelty, trespassing, and attempted poisoning. Under questioning, he folded almost immediately. In his confession, he admitted that Karen had promised to take care of his overdue HOA fines and get his driveway approved if he helped her scare off the dog family. She had convinced him that we were ruining the neighborhood, claiming we were planning to replace the board and tear down the HOA entirely, feeding him lies and manipulating his quiet resentment into something dangerous. The arrest hit the news. Local media picked up the story of the rogue HOA president, the poisoned dog, and the suburban family fighting back. Suddenly we were fielding interviews not because we wanted attention, but because we knew that visibility meant protection. If Karen had been trying to bury us under pressure, now she was the one under the spotlight. She was served with an additional criminal complaint the following week, and her own attorney dropped her as a client. The court date came fast after that. We stood in a packed courtroom with friends, neighbors, and reporters watching as the judge listened to testimony, reviewed documents, and examined every awful piece of evidence we'd been gathering for over half a year. Karen, defiant, even in the face of overwhelming proof, tried to paint herself as a misunderstood enforcer who had only wanted order, but the judge didn't buy it. The court ruled in our favor. Karen was found liable for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. She was ordered to pay a significant settlement and barred from participating in any HOA board activity in the future. But for us, the money wasn't the win, it was the peace. After the judgment, Karen quietly sold her house, moving away under cover of darkness just as she had operated in it. No goodbyes, no listing on public records, just gone. Her house stood empty for 2 months before a young couple with twin toddlers moved in. Completely unaware of the history, their laughter soon replacing the icy silence that had once surrounded that address. And Max, he was finally free to walk every inch of our street without fear. The neighbors, now united, worked together to rewrite the HOA bylaws to prevent another Karen from ever seizing power again. We still kept the cameras up, not out of fear, but habit. Max still barked at the gate now and then, and Lily, bless her, would always smile and say, "He remembers. He's making sure we're safe." And as it turned out, we were truly safe for the first time since we arrived in that quiet suburban nightmare. Peace returned to our neighborhood like a sunrise after a long storm's low. Tentative at first, but then unmistakably warm and real. With Karen gone and the court case behind us, the fear that had once ruled our daily lives began to fade. Didn't vanish overnight. Lily still hesitated before opening the front door alone. And we still double-checked the locks each night out of habit, but over time, the tension loosened its grip. For the first time in almost a year, our backyard echoed not with shouting or barking or angry knocks on the door, but with laughter. The squeals of kids running through sprinklers, and the rhythmic bounce of a tennis ball as Max played fetch. With Lily, the transformation in her was the greatest victory of all. The girl who once refused to leave the house without holding Max's leash now laughed freely with the neighborhood kids, organizing little dog parades up and down the street where every pet was welcome, regardless of size or breed. Max, ever gentle and loyal, became the unofficial mascot of our block. He even got his own Christmas sweater with a sheriff's badge sewn into it. A cheeky tribute from our neighbors who now saw him as a four-legged hero. The HOA board, under Leo's honest leadership, was rebuilt from the ground up with transparency and fairness in mind. New policies were introduced with actual community votes. All violation notices required board approval, and any financial Decisions had to be posted publicly. The fear was replaced with trust, and the silence that Karen had weaponized was now filled with collaboration and conversation. But there was one final chapter to this story, one unexpected twist that proved just how deep Karen's obsession had gone and just how much damage one person could do when left unchecked. It happened nearly 3 months after her departure, when we received a package addressed to the enemy family. With no return label, no postage, just a brown box left on our porch early one morning. I hesitated to open it, fearing the worst. But inside was nothing dangerous, only a small photo album filled with pictures. At first we didn't recognize them, but then we saw the truth. They were surveillance photos of us. Walking Max, picking up groceries. Lily riding her bike. Dozens of them, taken at odd angles, some from behind bushes, others through car windows. One even showed us watching TV through our living room window. Tucked in the back of the album was a note, scrawled in the same block handwriting we had. Seen before? You think you've won, but I see everything. We handed it to the police immediately, but the package had no fingerprints, no DNA, no evidence that could be traced. The officers assured us it was likely just a final attempt to intimidate, a last gasp from someone who had lost her power. But I didn't tell Lily about the photos. I didn't want her afraid again. Instead, we quietly increased our home security. And I used the fear I felt to solidify my resolve, not just for my family, but for every family that had been targeted, silenced or harassed by someone hiding behind rules. In the weeks that followed, we worked with a local nonprofit that advocated for HOA reform, sharing our story in private forums, and eventually in a national report about homeowner abuse and the need for oversight. I never wanted fame, and we certainly didn't seek pity, but the story needed to be told, because we weren't the first, and we wouldn't be the last. Karen may have left our street, but there are Karens in every city, every community, to people who misuse power, people who bully behind bureaucratic walls, people who mistake control for leadership. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence is their greatest weapon. Our victory wasn't just in court, wasn't even in Karen's departure. It was in the strength we found in each other, the neighbors who finally stood up, the community that chose truth over fear, and the quiet power of a loyal golden retriever who reminded us what it meant to protect what mattered most. Max, to this day, still pauses when we walk past Karen's old house. His ears perked like he's checking that the ghosts are really gone. I like to think he knows what we all went through, what we fought for, and what we won together. He doesn't need words to understand that the world outside the fence is safe. Again, perfect, but better. And every time I see Lily smiling without looking over her shoulder, I know it was worth every sleepless night, every court hearing, every false accusation, because fear didn't win. Karen didn't win. We did. If this story reminded you of something in your own neighborhood, or if you just believe in standing up to bullies, no matter what shape they take, then hit that subscribe button and join us at Sham Stories, because the next tale might be happening on your street. You'll want to be ready when it does.